Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Hit It podcast. I know everyone's going to be super excited for this episode because we're going to talk slalom today, and none other than Seth Stisher on the podcast. Seth, what's going on, my man?
Not a lot, man. Just glad to be here with you to talk shop for a little while.
Exactly. Well, summertime is here. We just ended the Masters, and now everything kicks off. Tournament season. Just before we get started, what do you got lined up the next couple of weeks? Are you hitting any tournaments, skiing a lot, or what's been going on?
I am. I'll be honest. This is the first season where I'm having to divide and conquer with my own son and be a little more selfless because he's got tournaments that he's qualified for and that he wants to attend, and we want him to be there. So we both have worlds this year. So got to go to Calgary for his worlds and Spain later in the year for mine. We'll both be at nationals with the Conley booth, but also competing. Got several little tournaments in between, and he actually skied the two qualifiers for the Masters, and he watched you from home announcing it. A little bit disappointed, but eager for next year already.
Well, I can say this. I think we're going to see him next year and probably the next year and the next year. He is skiing outstanding. So it's so exciting to see you guys skiing so well. And it sounds like you're going to be racking up the frequent flyer miles. So have fun in Canada and Spain towards the end of the year. Well, one of the things that I wanted to really hit on at the very start of this podcast is your coaching philosophy. You've been coaching a long time. You've been skiing a long time. But your coaching philosophy, and people can go to your website and check this out as well, but it really stood out to me. And I wanted to open up with that. Talk to us a little bit about your philosophy.
Well, first of all, I think you started by saying I was old because I've been doing it so long. I can respect that. And you're right. Honestly, my coaching philosophy over the years, and I think you find when you're coaching that it doesn't always click for some people. There's certain people that, gravitate towards different coaches based on philosophies and styles. But my biggest philosophy has always been to really include the skier. And sometimes I get challenged with that. One of my biggest things is I ask more questions in the first set than I do give answers. And I lead with that a lot of times because I really want to know where someone is, and I want to know that they're vested in it. Because at the end of the day, or the end of the week, or the end of that session, they're going away and it's their skiing, and they need to know and feel what they're working on and take it with them. Now, I know that's just from a coaching style perspective, but philosophically beyond that, I really have always kind of approached it from an athletic stance, an athletic standpoint, I should say. I preached athletic stance for years, but basically the idea that just like all athletes, we've got to be able to move dynamically, be strong while doing so, which makes this sport, as you know, very demanding on the body. But having the athleticism and building the athleticism to be able to move dynamically through the slalom course is paramount, in my opinion.
That's right. And one of the things we borrow a lot of terminology from physics to try to explain all that. Talk to us a little bit about that, because sometimes I think when we look at slalom skiing, different skiers look different. Some things work for some skiers, some don't, but it may not necessarily be something that's foundational. It may be more stylistic. And when you look at the physics of it, it's like, yeah, that looks different, but what they're doing is exactly right. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and a great topic, and it gets overlooked. And I think it's how a lot of times you see people coaching different things that you might realize over the course of time are mildly irrelevant. I've had this conversation with people before, how I really built my skiing and my coaching by a lot of research on my own. And it is watching athletes and trying to decide what parts of what they do are actual, physical function relative to water skiing or relative to being towed behind something, and what parts of it are just style. So you definitely will see what you said, a lot of different looks to what's going on. But if you stick to the idea that we're swinging behind a boat while also riding a ski that's carving for us, you've got several elements that you have to put in play together. And I actually think of that as it's almost like two different things packed into one. Swinging behind something that's towing you is a challenge in and of itself. And then you put yourself on something on top of water where any slight movement on it can totally affect direction, speed, load on your body, and that sort of thing. So coupling those two together is a very critical piece of slalom skiing. And to your point, to be a little more specific, how you hook up with the boat, the stance that you have, whether it looks the way we want it or not, how much structural integrity does that stance have? That may be different for every person out there. I'm a pretty thin guy. I've coached a lot of guys who look like they could, lift a car over their head. It doesn't always equate to value in the slalom course if
That's
they
right.
can't stack and align their body. So um, that's the big thing to me is trying to figure out how to utilize the boat rather than fight the boat, and do it while standing on a ski that you're affecting with the mild movements and the things that you do.
That's right. The energy of the boat will always win. It's better to use that than your own body. Well, and sometimes when it comes to terminology, different coaches say things differently. Now, they may mean the same exact thing, but some terminology seems, at least in recent years to me, have developed more accurately. For example, maybe in the 90s or early 2000s when we were talking about reaching at the buoy, maybe the better terminology was now releasing at the buoy, not a direct reach. Where, I remember going to coaches and we were talking about, well, we're coming into the buoy and we want to get, you know, this reach to the pylon or up towards the pylon. And there was a lot of discussion about that. And now it's more of talking about this release and this swing. So, talk to us a little bit about terminology because I think sometimes when we're out in the water or we are receiving coaching, um, certain words or certain terms mean different things to different people. And being on the same page with the person that you're skiing with is probably vital.
Agree. And that all goes back to communication. I don't care if it's coaching or just your interpersonal relationships. Not that I can give advice on that topic, but the idea, of predefining some terms when you're out there, saying to someone, hey, when you say reach to me, like I have people sitting in the water where I'm coaching them and they keep telling me something. And I say, okay, I need you to explain that to me in your brain. How does that,
Mm,
what does reaching mean? Are you talking about your body moving away from the handle? Are you talking about the handle moving away from you? Are you talking about completely releasing from the load of the boat? Kind of clarifying that from the start is critical. I don't think that our purpose has changed as much over the years as we think it has. I think we have little trends that create buzzwords. The buzzwords get overdone. And I also believe when people get coaching, one of the first things you do is you take that coaching and you go tell all your buddies that you ski with back home, here's what he told me to do, or here's what she
right,
told me to do.
right,
And then you got 15 people trying something that was specifically engineered for one person.
right.
And
Wow.
so coaching is not, it's not a video instructional. It's not to be passed on exactly as it is. So to that point too, with the wording of how you say things, I've found myself saying things to students before that are words that I hate. Like I'll go to a specific one, hips up. I
Hips
was
up.
told hips up when I was little, hips up, hips up, hips up. Over time, hips up to me became this arched back, driving your hips so far forward that you're actually kicking yourself back to the back
Mm,
of the ski because your torso goes back. So I started shying away from that. But when I find a skier that's really squatty and is letting their center of mass and center of drag behind them, then maybe hips up makes sense. But I
sure.
always give a disclaimer, don't take this and go throw it at everybody. I find myself thinking in my own skiing about hips up more now than I ever did. And I think some of that is just age and, awareness, muscle awareness in your body and strength and that sort of thing. I have to do it to stay strong enough through the center line to really get a good transition out and utilize the boat's energy. But again, can be misunderstood, passed along.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the physics piece of your philosophy of really understanding the game or understanding your movement. Because if you have a solid foundation and understanding how the ski moves through the water and where your body needs to be, a lot of the terminology starts to either make more sense or less sense. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And that's, again, for example, I talk about riding the board versus aligning your forces with the boat. Hips up may cause you to poorly ride the ski that you're on, but it might be great for the swing behind the boat. Where do we find that balance between people? And this is a kind of a funny example. I think my father is the one who taught me to ski. And at some point, he even admitted, it's you're going to have to go get some coaching on your own, or you're going to have to figure some things out on your own. I started getting to a level where I had to step beyond. My dad, for years, tried so hard to get his hips up. And now when he skis with us over the past couple of years, I remember telling him, you know what, the wakes, now that they're getting bigger because it's a little bit slower speed, those wakes getting bigger, it's pretty difficult to hold position when you're just arched up with your hips pressed forward. So I told him that balance on the ski, in his case, is far more important than that body alignment or structure, so that the ski can kind of absorb the bump of those wakes. It's a it's not really a change in theory or philosophy. It's just trying to figure out which is going to help you the most based on what you're challenged with.
Sure, sure. And everybody has, range. Some people are very flexible, some people are not, some people are going slower. And before we move on, I wanted to touch on with that point on the athletic stance, because I think, at least from the bird's eye view, or somebody on the shoreline that has watched skiing almost evolve over the last decade, it seems like they're taller on their ski. Back in the day, it seemed like maybe Chris Parrish, maybe Jeff Rogers kind of looked like the only ones who stood really, really tall. But where do you find yourself in that conversation right now? Are you saying, "Hey, it's this athletic stance," and they're saying, "Well, what does that mean?" Well, does that mean standing tall? What does that balance point look like? What is the best way to coach it?
That's a great question. And again, to some degree, the coaching of it, I think, depends on what you're starting with. If we're building someone from the ground up, I actually believe ground up or water up is the way to start. You can get tall and aligned on the ski, but if you didn't start from the balls of your feet and didn't start from a position that was athletic, then you're actually creating more issues. I don't know if you recall back when Tad Schreiber and I had H2 Osmosis, and before we sold H2O Pro Shop, one of our taglines was "Ride the Water." And that was chosen just because of obviously what we do, but it was a big one for me in coaching, that we never want you pushing water. So if you're standing on a water ski following the boat and you're fully aligned and stacked, but that is kicked back just a little bit, like we were kind of taught when we were kids, you're actually pushing water. So you're creating resistance that gives you no value. So starting from a balanced position on your feet, balls of your feet, and building it up from there and getting tall. And Parrish, like you said, is a perfect example. He's always been very balanced on his feet and tall and aligned. The combination of both, I think, are critical for maximum efficiency. That doesn't mean you're not going to see a skier out there, a pro skier, who's back a little further than others or squatted a little further than others. Nobody does it 100% perfectly, but when you're looking for maximum efficiency, I think you build it from the ski up, balls of the feet, and then aligned up on top of that.
Very good. Very good. Well, here's something we have not, and we probably should have a long time ago on the podcast, touched on, but we were talking offline about this, and I think this is so important. Take you and your son, for example, got some big tournaments coming up, world tournament type tournaments. The pressure gets turned up in practice, and the anticipation for those events, and how you train, and to have a healthy training culture. And culture is so important when you think about where you're taking your skiing, because I think a lot of times we lose sight of that in tournaments, and it doesn't become fun anymore. The competition seems more like a job than it is, something that we're really just trying to achieve as a goal, as something that we always have really wanted to do. But skiing culture, the day-to-day grind of it to get better. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like that changes from year to year for myself, and I've seen it with my son as well. I also feel like I know that my methods don't apply to everyone. I've learned that through my son as well. And if we're talking, first of all, about that training dynamic between the two of us, I think a lot of that is me constantly remembering that what I'm trying to create is a really good human who knows how to grind it out, who knows how to work through issues, who knows how to stay disciplined even though every day is not rewarded. Um, and in seeing him, I feel like I've learned more about my skiing, and how I coach. The training aspect of it has improved from being so vested in my son's performance and improvement. I do believe that we often take ourselves a little too seriously, but at the same time, I guess I've probably watched a little too much of Kobe Bryant and Jordan and those people who are just completely obsessed with it.
Right.
There's a degree of that is required to make it to a certain level. But I think when you realize that 0.00, what is it, 0.002% of athletes become professionals in any form, don't take yourself too seriously, because all you're really doing is having a life experience. If you can learn to sort of go with the flow of what's happening, but keep trying to get a little better every day, I think you'll never disappoint yourself. But if every day you wake up and think, I want to win gold this year, wherever, you can disappoint yourself day to day and lose sight of it. It's not about that goal. It's about that daily fight of do your job and get just a little better every day.
I was thinking about perfectionists the other day, and I was thinking about two sports that will humble you very quickly. One of them would be golf, and I would say the leader might be water skiing because there is just, I, how many times have you been out there and you're like, well, I just ran this pass yesterday. Now I can't even get a start at this pass today. And it's just very, very humbling. And that's going back to the coaching element, knowing what you have and a personality when you're coaching that particular person. A perfectionist is going to have to look at this sport differently. You look at other sports, maybe let's take the basketball example. Maybe you go to the gym and you can train by yourself and do that all day by yourself. But when you're out there water skiing, you can't do that by yourself. You're always going to have somebody watching you. Your driver's going to know what you're doing. Sometimes we've had this, and actually, Parrish, he was on our last episode. We talked about this. He said, the interesting thing about video coaching now is people are not as intimidated when I get in the boat and they've never known who I was before. I mean, they knew my credentials, but they didn't meet me, shake my hand, and they're actually skiing better, and I get a better picture of what they're doing on the water from the video coaching. So I wanted to get your perspective on personalities because everybody's different, and to develop a healthy ski culture, it's so important to understand those personalities.
Yeah, I mean, again, from a coaching standpoint, I think it's very important to do some assessing, not to be confused with judging, but figure out who you have. I mean, I've two passes into the first set with someone, asked them what they consider their personality type. Like, are you type A? If you're type A, I can align with that, I think, a little more, because I understand, let's right angles and let's fit things into boxes and let's own what we're doing. you know and if they're not, I kind of have to take a different approach to the whole thing. I think your personality is a big part of it, and I think as a skier, forgetting the coaching piece, you have to learn what your personality is. We all did it accidentally through school. If we've had any level of success in anything we've done, we've learned to work with what our personality traits are. Very seldom do we, occasionally we overcome a few things. Like, I'm a procrastinator, but I work through it. I'm an introvert, but I've worked through it to become an extrovert. But most things, I am the way I am. And being able to take that and identify it, even if you have to create bullet points, if you're really vested in water skiing, bullet points as to how you learn, how your attitude is on a good day, how your attitude is on a bad day, and work around that, I think is critical. And I've seen it. I'll go back to the, father-son skiing situation. My son's training methods are completely different than mine ever were.
Wow.
He's not very repetitive. He pushes himself constantly. But I recognize now, at almost 50 years old, I spent too many days skiing perfectly at easy passes and
Mm.
slalom instead of pushing myself. And pushing yourself, you'll make mistakes. I didn't want to make the mistakes. I wanted to do it perfectly, and I felt like I needed to grind that in. But the reality is, it's got to get ugly. You got to give it hell sometimes, right? So, and different personalities do it differently.
That's such a good example, Seth. I remember, and it took me a while to see that develop. I think too in the United States, for whatever reason, we were talking about this the other day, whether we would start kids off on long line or we got focused on back to backs or whatever the case is. I remember when I went to Louisiana Monroe and I saw it for the first time. I think it was Adam Sedemeyer, Martin Bartolski, and Daniel Avarko. They came over from the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and it had to be February, a very cold February, but they had skied a couple of times, and they were like, "Yeah, go ahead and put it on 39." And I was like, in February? And they're like, yeah, they'd go out and do their trick run and they'd be like, okay, it's time to, work on toe step 5 back. And it was the first time I had really, I had always kind of looked at skiing like, well, it's too cold or it's too windy. You can't do this, you can't do that. And it was almost boxing yourself in to a point where you weren't training at the level that you were trying to aspire to. And I think that's kind of where you're going at that is sometimes you think you're doing the right thing by perfecting it, but you may be holding yourself back in some regard.
100%. And just to kind of piggyback on that, an example. So last winter before last, I ski with Adam Caldwell a lot, who's local here in
Okay, yeah,
Charleston. We've got 2 sites here. Skied with Adam a ton, and it was bitter cold a lot of days. In fact, we went out, I think it was the day before Christmas Eve, and the temperature was dropping during the middle of the day. I think when he got out there, it was 41. When I got out there, it was 39 degrees, Pine Lakes degrees. And that day was pretty miserable, but I realized, first of all, if I could ski that day, I can ski any day.
sure.
But what Adam never did is Adam skied like it was still summer the entire winter. And
Mm.
just out of probably having this small degree of machismo, I was like, well, I'm not going to be the guy that's sitting here running 32 off all winter. So I kept sort of, and last year was one of my best seasons ever. And
Wow.
this past winter, I skied a bunch of easy passes over the winter, and it took me forever to get going again at 38 and 39.
Wow.
So
That's a
yeah,
great point.
and it changes, right? So it doesn't mean that that's going to always be my way. It doesn't mean that everything I've done is an error. I have learned a good base, but you got to listen to yourself. Like my warm up from season to season is different depending on where my headspace is, and you gotta listen to yourself.
Sure. Well, I know a lot of parents will take a look at this podcast and their son or daughter are rising up the ranks or they're getting into skiing for the first time. I know a lot of families going to be getting into skiing and then they go to their first tournament. We just mentioned this, but what do you think about you're developing a skier from the ground up? Let's say they're 7, 8, 9 years old. How do you get them going? What's the right line length? What's the right speed? There's going to be some challenges. Obviously, they're going to be small. They're going to be battling big wakes and all the conditions out there. But what's the right way to start it after what you've seen in skiing over 50 years?
Well, I have to say, and this is going to be ambiguous as possible, there is no absolute. There are no absolutes, period. That's you, me, our kids, whatever. Some kids are ones that just go out and want to charge at it, and they're not afraid of anything, and a face plant here and there doesn't bother them. Some kids, that's not the case. You have to listen to your kids. And as you know, just like I do, they don't come with an owner's manual, whether it's water skiing or just life. We don't know that we're doing it right. We just do it the best way we can. But I can guarantee you, most parents that are active parents will try and assess how their child reacts the best. Now, to get more specific, I personally believe overall there's more to gain probably from using the mini course and going 15 off. I don't necessarily love the super slow speeds, but kids are starting so early. I think that's okay. But the mini course is one for me in all sports. I used to complain about it with basketball, and now they do it. I don't think they do it long enough, but a lower goal and a smaller ball, you can learn to shoot
Right.
the basketball the right way. That's what the mini course is. You can learn to slalom ski the right way on a less extreme magnitude and less extreme swing. The problem is, to the point of what we just talked about, is you have certain mentalities where if a kid's friends are running the course at Longline and that kid is running the mini course, it may not be enough to keep the hook in them. So
Right.
if you have to get the hook in the kid, then yeah, you got to go to Longline. So again, no absolutes, but I think technique and long-term growth starts better from learning the narrower concept on a shorter line and getting in that swing, and it all seems to map out a little more, and then you don't have quite as difficult or steep of a learning curve after that.
I completely agree. It goes back onto the old school. I find this when I'm announcing, I'm like, 28 off of a standard 75-foot line. Well, yeah, 75 feet at long line is the standard line, but I think we would both agree if you're going to start, 15 is where you need to be.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, anywhere you are, if someone's got a ski long line, everyone, it's all hands on deck to scramble and find 15 feet of rope because we don't have it usually, right?
Right, right.
You have to use somebody's jump line and then, and then go back at it. But I do believe that, yeah, the physics get a little weird at 75 feet.
Sure. Well, Seth, you're a super busy guy, right? So you're not only coaching your son skiing, you're skiing yourself, you're coaching other people, you're doing a lot of real estate. I want to get your perspective though, because I think people who are in the sport know this, but people who may come to the sport and they're like, man, I'm going to just try this out. What is it like to have water skiing in your life? What has water skiing brought to your life? Because as water skiers, we know we've seen life outside of water skiing and maybe even have dabbled in, hey, maybe that looks more fun over there, only to realize, no, that's not nearly as fun as living the lake life. What does the lake life mean to you?
It's an interesting question that has probably multitude of answers over the course of my life. Right after college, when I first graduated, it probably kept me out of the bars because I wanted to go
Mhm.
ski. When you can finally go to happy hour anytime you want, you don't, because you have something that to put your focus into.
Sure.
An aging athlete, same thing. It's a piece of me that requires me to continue to be fit. That's important. The other piece, or the other 10 pieces, family. If your family's hooked into it, whether it be slalom skiing or just being on the water, it's just a great, I mean, this sounds very kumbaya, but it's just a great family activity that gives you
Sure.
something to work around. And if when your kids get older, if coming home means, hey, we get to all go ski together and we get that time that's truly quality time, it's not sitting on the couch watching a show or whatever, it's valuable. It's great. And then the other piece, I think, is the people that you meet. There's a lot of good people out there, and it gives a common thread that, like I always say, it's the smallest sport on earth, but it's everywhere. I've been
Right.
on teams where I'm talking to someone and they say, "Oh, I know a water skier," and they name them, and I talk to them
You
about,
know
"Yeah, I
them.
just saw him 2 weeks ago," or whatever. It holds things together. You mentioned I'm in real estate, like the number of transactions that have come from the water ski world where I got to build relationships with people that were truly earnest relationships because there was no sales aspect of it. It was just, hey, we share the same passion and we begin to trust each other. And then later in life, we get to work together and trust one another. So
That's outstanding. No, I love that story. Going back a little bit, growing up, it sounded like you spent a lot of time with your dad. He was coaching you. You were trying to figure out how to be the best skier you possibly could. So it was coaching from your dad, probably the most, influential person in your life to give you that coaching. But you're also going home, taking a look at the pros, going, okay, well, my favorite is this, this, and this, and I like what they're doing. Let's go see if this works out on the water. And going back kind of to the top of the podcast of understanding the difference between what was true technique and what was style, talk to us a little bit about experimenting what you've seen pros do when you were growing up, and then going to the lake and going, man, that didn't work quite like I thought, but doing that, I can see what they're doing here, because I think we get a lot of ideas. I gave you the example offline the other day. I remember in the early 2000s, like we are talking about reaching or releasing with the handle. Everybody was putting their free arm by their hip. I mean, that was the thing. But looking back on that, was that really getting anybody an extra buoy? Probably not. I don't know. But walk us through that process of understanding. Obviously, we see the success from skiers, but how does that translate to our own skiing, and what's the best way to go through that process?
there's definitely some trial and error. It depends on whether you have a coach that you trust or not. A perfect example when I was a kid, and I don't know why these two stand out to me. And being a male skier, it was two females, Dina Brush, now Dina Maple,
Mhm.
Phil Duval. Both had a couple of things. Dina Brush always pulled her outside arm back and made kind of a triangle over off of her hip. And I remember thinking, that looks cool. I'll try that. And then as I did it, I was like, it's not giving me anything. And I really realized it's just a style. And the same with Camille. She would take the handle and actually flip it.
The twist, yeah.
She reached, yeah. And to me, that didn't create anything for me either. It probably did for her. So maybe that's a part of it. Maybe it's not just style versus physics, it's what relates to specific people. But studying those things, I think, is super important. And if you have a good coach that you do trust, be sure, I think, and have conversations with that coach to get the why sometimes. Because even myself in coaching, there are times when I started to coach some concept and I catch myself just truly dumping it on my student, not actually really thinking about the why was I telling them this, or is it just something that maybe it worked for me or whatever. Why does it really work that way? And I think I've learned that more late in life. you know this is the example of why I learned it late in life, I think, is right when Nate Smith came on the scene. He had a little article in the magazine years and years ago and it talked about keeping pressure on his down shoulder, back shoulder, away shoulder, whichever one you want to call it. There's tons of confusions. In water skiing, we have like 9 shoulders if you want to describe them. But it was talking about that down shoulder. And we've just come out of an era that began with like Jamie Beauchene and Marcus and Terry talking about keeping your body open through the wake, shoulders open to the boat. And here we've got this guy who's kicking everyone's butt saying you got to keep pressure on your down shoulder. The people who came to me trying to emulate it were back to just burying their shoulder and almost themselves through the wakes. It was misinterpreted a little bit, but it made me realize that some of the key there is you got to keep the pressure against the line to utilize the boat. For some people, that is taking your shoulder that's away and actually keeping it pressed away through your transition, so you're not just giving everything to the boat. Some people, it's opening up a little more just to keep your spine aligned, to have a better use or better capitalization on the pull from the boat. The why is the big thing, I think, in the physics versus style.
Yeah.
Look at something, ask yourself why, try it, ask your coach. Don't just blindly emulate.
Sure. No, that's a great point too, because you can change things and they will undoubtedly make you feel different. Going back to the example about flipping or twisting the handle, I was in that same boat. I watched that. I saw a couple skiers do that. I went out. I said, "Well, I'm going to do this on my, I believe it was my offside turn, because that's the way you would open up." And you could feel the pull through your elbow when you would turn, and then you would kind of release the arm, and you could definitely feel it, but it wasn't really doing anything with my ski, right? Going back to this concept of where's the ski? Where is it carving? How are you coming back through the turn? I could feel it in my upper body and what it was doing, but I don't think it was generating any more angle. And that's where it goes back to the point of someone like yourself watching you and saying, like, okay, you're trying this and you're feeling it, but I don't know if it's bringing you the value you think it's bringing.
I agree 100%. And I keep touching on those things. Again, I mentioned skiing with Adam Caldwell over two winters ago, and then I ski with him off and on now. He's opened my eyes to so many things that, they're not as different from what I had thought as you'd think, but they're different approaches enough that it makes me question everything we do now.
Sure.
And I ask myself why. My instinct with my son is to start to tell him something and then pause and go, okay, wait a minute. Is this going to have value to him, or am I regurgitating something I stored away in the back of my brain 10 years ago that I thought was truly critical? And that's, I think, going back to your point about different skiers looking different, that's where that comes from. You try a few things, maybe it does work for you. Maybe it just because of the brain waves that it changed for you, it works. So you stick to it, but it might not work for everybody.
Right. Right. No, great points. Well, a lot of our listeners are familiar with the articles that you've published throughout the years, and I wanted to touch base on some of those articles. And it was a pleasant surprise, because when I went to your website, you have a lot of them posted, and you've addressed a lot of different things throughout the years. The Going back to your point, nothing's truly absolute, right? So when you write some of this stuff, you almost have to write it with a qualifier to say, here is a general concept, but, and that's a big but, for this, and this reason, it could be different. Talk to us a little bit about how you've developed those articles, what you've tried to focus on in those articles, because writing to, I guess, the mass public of water skiers is a lot different than personal coaching.
Agree. Yeah, I think there's probably politics and sales involved in writing to the general public versus a specific, having a specific coaching session. And you don't want to, I don't think you want to alienate someone when you're coaching them, whether you're writing the article or coaching them. And that's a lot of the reason for no absolutes. But, over the years, I've tried to make sure that I stick to somewhat of the basic ideology, I guess, behind swinging behind the boat and carving on the ski. Like we talked about. One of the first articles I ever wrote was the balanced stance, and it was about people who just automatically lean back when you put a handle in their hand. To me, critical that you're not fighting the boat until you're needing to generate something. So leaning away from the boat when you're going the same direction of the boat is of zero value and is actually a negative net gain. So that probably is, again, one of the most critical. Kind of utilizing the boat, or thinking of it that way, thinking of it as though you're kind of the superintendent or the contractor that's taking the ski, the rope, the boat, and all of those elements and managing them so that they each work for you. You know, you're younger than me, but you still same general, I guess, time frame with some of our peak skiing. People talk about being light on the line.
Yeah.
Nobody really talks about that now. What did that mean? That meant don't unnecessarily load the line. Don't
Right.
drop in a
Right.
hole that you can't get out of. Utilize the boat does mean being heavy on the line, but not fruitlessly, of course. So, like, I think one of the phrases in one of my articles was utilize the work zone. It
Mm,
was as you're in that space behind the boat where it's pulling you. Yeah, you're not trying to let it win, but you don't want to take off a big enough bite that after you pass through the work zone, you lose.
mm.
So that was a huge one. You know, the funny part is that most of my articles come from when I'm coaching. And over the years, it's always been that way, especially since we were carrying phones with us all the time. There's been times when I'm talking to someone and coaching them, and some little flutter of a cool way to think of something pops into my head. And I'll say, hang on a second, and I'll voice text it to myself or put the notes in my phone and remember
Okay.
to build off of it later. My kids make fun of me for all the titles on these articles too. They still talk about various titles, like how corny they are or whatever, but got to have a little bit of a tagline. But I will say this, and this is not technique related, but you open it up for me by talking about the articles. One of the ones that mattered the most to me was about um, coaching kids. And it's not just about coaching them to be great skiers. And this is my moment of soapbox while I have a listener or two out there still hanging. We're raising humans, we're contributing to the world. And water skiing is one of the ways where I think most people who grew up water skiing end up finding success in some way. I'm not talking about financial success or whatever. I'm not talking about water ski success, but they find success as a human. And I think if we focus on that with our skiing and with our coaching of kids, like I always tell my son, I want you to be very confident on the water, even to the point of being almost cocky on the water. But
Mm,
when you get back to that dock, you better be the most humble individual I've ever,
mm.
crossed. And that to me is super important. And it's the way we all have to live. In your work, you don't come in all meek and trying to do what you
Right.
want to
Right.
do. You come in knowing what you have to do and taking charge, but not in a way that, pushes people away.
Sure.
So that's my soapbox for teach them to ski, but teach them to be great humans too. And I think the more people we expose the sport to, the more opportunity we have to do that sort of thing.
And it's amazing. We've had this conversation a couple of times where people in the sport, whether they're professional skiers and they balance between a professional career or they do very well at their side career, have achieved things. I mean, I just look at the people I grew up skiing with that I went to college with that were on the ski team. One became a fighter pilot, Tyler Collins, and now he's a captain for Delta. My other roommate, Kyle Damon, he's got a PhD and he's an MD and he's a general sergeant, right? So it is so important. And I think if parents understood the dedication that is required of the sport, because let's just be real, trying to achieve the top levels of success in water skiing, there is a ton of grit that's going to be required. The training, there's a lot of days you don't want to be out there that you need to be, and you've pushed yourself to a point where you go, man, I really know if I put in the work, I can achieve this. Now, maybe I'm going to back this off. I'm going to have a family. I'm going to do whatever, but I just need to pivot and do this in another area of my life because I've already done this once. I just do it in another area. And there's so much truth. And I love that your focus is so big on that.
Yeah, I think that's huge, and it obviously pays off on the water. Period. It is like my best years have been the ones where I think whether it's windy or it's raining, somebody's not training today,
That's
so I
right.
will, so I will, and
That's
that's life
right.
too. So my kids again make fun of the old life metaphors that come out of dad's mouth, but that whether it's skiing or whatever, you just keep grinding, and going back quickly to the articles. The other ones are be understanding the phases of your training. Like I think I wrote one called the humble spring. It's not easy when you start. Don't
That's
go out
right.
to be the hero and the same skier you were 4 months ago if you live somewhere where you took all those months off. Go out and get everything in order, get everything, moving again, and map out a plan for your year and then start chipping away at that plan.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I want to ask you this question personally because we've talked about your articles, we've talked to you as a coach, but your own skiing. You're 50 years old. You're going to the worlds. You're training hard. I was talking to you the other day. You're skiing almost every day. What are your goals? Obviously, you've got them this year, but what is for Seth Stisher? What is his goals coming into 2024?
Huh. Well, being that we have the worlds, the last worlds I competed in, I secured the top spot after qualifying, the
Mm,
qualifying round, and then didn't make the podium in the finals. So
mm,
obviously the worlds, I have a little chip on my shoulder there. But one of the things I mentioned to some of the people when we were at the Pan Ams, I think last year, nobody really cares. We're older people going out skiing the worlds. Do people really care? It doesn't matter. The exhilarating feeling you get from that competition and that little bit of performance anxiety you get and what it does for your body is a fuel that I feel like I'll always need. And I
sure.
also believe that people who don't know that feeling, it's not that they don't need that, they just haven't experienced it. I do believe that, grinding it out every day for something is super important. Water skiing to me, it it keeps me alive. Like it keeps me wanting to do everything else in my life to a level
That's
that
right.
is similar. But if you talk really directly about goals, I want to keep improving, and that's a really hard thing because I mean, I don't think I'm ever going to be running the scores I ran at 36 now. I don't even go 36, and it feels like we're flying when I do. But I want to keep improving. I want to keep staying ahead, and I want to keep competing at the top level I possibly can.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I would say this, we talked a little bit about just the functionality of physics on a ski, but from an announcer standpoint, where I find myself a lot of the times, your style is one of the coolest ones to announce for because you do look different, right? Your style is so fluid at times, it doesn't look like you're doing much work. Now, I know you are probably thinking like, yeah, it looks easy, but you should, I'm breathing on the other end of the lake to keep that body position. Talk to us a little bit about your style, just from a stylistic standpoint, because at 50 years of age, you talked about it. I mean, you've been through different phases where different styles kind of took the way slalom skiing looked of that day from the 90s into the 2000s. I mean, we would talk about Marcus Brown or we would talk about Chris Paris, very different, Jamie Beauchesne. And now, Nate Smith came along and now it seems to be developing into something a little bit different. We just saw the success at the LCQ from Charlie Ross running 5 at 41. That looks a lot different. Talk to us a little bit about your style.
Well, it's I'm like a mutt. It's a little piece of all the things that I experimented with over the years. One of the things that even coaching was always a problem when I would go ski and I'd been coaching people, they would come back out and you'd see them like segmenting their body and trying to drive their hips and their shoulders are all perfectly level and it looks kind of awkward. And I think it's because I probably overemphasized some of that in my own career forever. I always thought about shoulders level, being way over my front foot, riding down
Mm,
the leg and making sure my center of mass is moving to where I want to go. Um, some of that I've mildly abandoned. Some of it is just going to be in there forever. But I remember saying when I was younger that I was concerned how dynamic my core and center of my body
mm,
was, because as I get older, that's probably not going to be as easy. And that goes back to me telling you earlier, I'm trying harder to stay a little bit taller through the center line and through the swing so that I don't get crushed.
yeah,
And
crushed.
I
Yeah.
won't say I feel like I'm as fit as I've ever been, but I don't know if I'm truly as strong overall
Strong.
as I. So
Yeah. Yeah, great point. Well, if for all of our listeners, if you have not seen Seth ski, you'll be in a real treat. And I love that because that's maybe why you have this unique style, that stylistic feels, because you've tried out so many different things. Some things work, some things don't, some things you're abandoning, but regardless, it's really, really fun and cool to watch. Finish this statement for me. I water ski because.
wow, that's a tough one. I water ski because I don't. If I had one answer, is because it is my life. Beyond all the work I do, it is it's got its tentacles into every aspect of my life. Even when I started real estate, I tried to separate it so people didn't see me as a part-time real estate agent that was also water skiing. it's part of who I am. People know me by
Sure.
that. Hey, guy that water skis. My kids, even my daughter who doesn't ski, well, she'll ski once a year, which is really cool. But we had life experiences with that. I traveled to Chile and homeschooled her for one
Hmm.
season when I was younger and coaching. My wife is a water skier. It's just a piece of me, and I wouldn't know how to let go of it. But the beauty is, I have no desire to let go of it.
Sure. Sure. Well, and the wonderful thing about that is you start to look at the longevity of your sport, taking care of your body and what you do, you're as athletic as you've ever been. I mean, even at 50, relatively young considering what guys have been able to achieve. I look at Chet Raley and Chet came over from Florida and skied in our South Central region and I was on the dock with him. I'm like, I just couldn't believe how good he looked out on the slalom course. I'm like, I just hope I can, have a portion of the way he looks when I'm his age. But isn't it exciting to know there's decades in front of you still?
Yeah, it is. It's exciting to hope there are decades in front of me. But
Well,
yeah, no,
Seth,
I still love it. So
yeah, no, this has been fantastic. And I tell you, I think a lot of people are going to want to contact you and go to your website, figure out how to get coaching from you. Obviously, you said it, your Conley skis. We were talking about one the other day. My kid's looking to try different skis and a different setup. Where can people track you down? Are you on social media? What's the best way to get in contact with you?
luckily I have one of those names that I assume I'm the only Seth Stisher in the world. So you can quickly just Google and find me in some fashion. But skiseth.com is my website for the water ski website. And that's probably the easiest way is to go there and you can click to contact me, or you can email me at seth@skiseth.com. And you mentioned Conley. I will say that my affiliation with Conley came later in life, and it's been almost 10 years, I think.
Wow.
That has definitely fueled some of my skiing as well, because working so closely with them is a whole nother aspect of the water ski life. Being able to spend time, doing R&D on these skis, putting them out there, helping people, like when you mentioned, something for your kids and needing to get through the wakes properly. When we have something to offer and something to help, that's always a positive thing.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we look forward to it.
I feel like I need to mention one more thing, because we
Okay.
talked
Yeah,
a
go
lot
ahead.
about skiing. We talked about my dad, and
Yeah.
my dad helping me and teaching me to ski and stuff. My mom's not a water skier, but she was sitting in that driver's seat the entire time. If she liked it or not, she was there doing it, and probably still would if we asked her to. So a lot of credit to that. It makes you have parents like that. You feel like you owe the world something because you had it easy.
That's right. No, it's incredible. You reflect back and being a family sport, and then you've got the community of people that you get to meet around you. There are how many people are out there? There's a bunch of people that may not ski, but they're involved in officiating, driving, hosting tournaments. I mean, it is truly, I think, even if you're not out on the water all the time, you could probably find your spot in skiing somewhere.
Yeah. Great point. Great point.
Well, with that said, Seth, this has been a tremendous interview. I can't wait for all of our listeners to hear it and reach out to you. Do you have anything else before we sign off?
No, I think it's great what you guys do, and I really appreciate it and glad to be a part of it.
Well, we're glad that you could join us here today. With that, we're signing off. We'll see you next time.